Alrighty. My name is Kendria Marshall. I am doing my presentation via Zoom just because it's the one format that I'm somewhat comfortable with. But if there's any issues, please let me know. So my presentation here I did on Lilith. I chose Lilith just because she's a really fascinating character. And it's really funny because I asked a bunch of different people about their opinions and their perceptions, if they've heard of her. I talked about this project, and a lot of people had different stories about her. So I really wanted to make sure that I added that in and kind of really understood the history beyond her. So, like I said, my presentation is on Lilith. Originally, the first known written or spoken about or artifact about Lilith came from Sumerian and Babylonian mythology. They listed Lilith as a Lilu, a Lilin, or a Lilitu, and I'm probably butchering those pronunciations, but these were spirits who caused different kinds of pain and destruction, and they were spirits that each one of these mythological stories really came to know her as. So right here on the PowerPoint, you can actually see the Bernie relief. It's a terracotta plaque that I found from Babylonia, and you see Lilith flanked by two owls, and she's standing on top of two lions. The owls tended to be what is a spiritual animal that she was known to be associated with, which we'll kind of see carried on later on into Christianity and Judaism and things like that. You can also find Lilith, she's spoken about in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Hulupu tree. She's kind of talked about a little bit in there, and much like the other stories about her, she is centered around destruction and pain and suffering. So it really comes down to she was a figure that they could blame a lot of the problems that they were not able to understand. They also had different kind of incantation bowls as well as amulets. You'll see here's a photograph of one of the amulets that was used to kind of protect women and children, because that's who she primarily, I don't want to say assaulted, but assaulted. And we'll kind of see each one of these figures down here comes into play later on. This over here is an incantation bowl that was put out just to kind of protect, and there was a scripture that's written next to it that kind of explains what's written in the bowl. So these amulets and these bowls really came to be known as a way to protect those who were unprotectable. So Lilith later on became known as, she became told as the first woman. She was introduced in the alphabet of Ben Sira, which is a Jewish text. She was told, unlike Eve, to have been made from the same dust as Adam was. And therefore, because they were made from the same things, Lilith perceived herself to be equal. During a time where they were becoming sexual, she refused to lay beneath him due to the fact that she believed them to be equal. Since they did not agree on that, she flew off in a rage in the form of an owl. Adam was obviously upset, so he spoke to God, and God sent 3 angels to go retrieve her. God's words were, if she wants to return, well and good, but if not, she must accept that 100 of her children will die every day. Unfortunately, Eve did not want to come back. She said that she was only made to make people sick and to be a problem, essentially. And so she said, "Leave me alone. I was created in order to sicken babies. Babies, if they are boys, from birth to day 8, she will have power over them. Girls, birth to day 20. Specifically, these dates end up being about the time when I was reading a time when circumcision happens for boys, and that kind of helps prevent Lilith from taking them over. Going back on one of the previous slides, it showed one of the amulets that was used, and the amulets had the names of those 3 angels, and I'm probably going to butcher them, but they are Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Samingaloth. But anyway, the names of these angels are put on the amulets, and Lilith agreed that if she saw the names on these amulets, she would not harm the children. Some of these stories do have Lilith returning to the Garden of Eden, and some of them have her remaining out of the Garden of Eden on her own. In the stories where she returned to the Garden of Eden, she did find that Adam had already moved on with Eve, and this kind of led her to be vengeful about it. So in response to her vengefulness, she would at night go and essentially rape Adam to replenish these demons that God was killing every day. So she was stealing the seeds of men to replenish the demons that God was killing, or her children. Over here we have an image that is actually shown on the Sistine Chapel. Right here you can kind of see a snake coiled up the tree of the Garden of Eden, and you see at the top of it a woman. That woman is sometimes referred to as Lilith, and the woman at the bottom is Eve. In the Kabbalah teachings later on by Rabbi Isaac, Lilith is paired with Samael, which is a given name of Satan, and they kind of work in unison to get humans to sin. In this image from the Sistine Chapel, you also see that Lilith becomes the snake that ends up tempting Adam and Eve into sinning and eating the fruit of the tree. And not all of these stories that I read did include Lilith as this snake-like character, but I think that it's important to kind of mention when we're looking at the combination between her and Samael. After this, there was a large period of time where this was all that Lilith was really known for, was being vengeful, a demon, a succubi, a vampire. I mean, all of these negative connotations. However, in the late 1950s, we kind of started to see an early reemergence of them. Right here we have a painting of by Dante Gabriel Rossetti in 1866, Lady Lilith. And you can kind of see like that there, while this isn't obviously made in 1950s, you can see that there is a different perception of her. So in the late 1950s, feminism was starting to kind of ramp up, and especially after World War II, when people were starting to come home, Lilith almost became an idol for these different types of feminism, strikes and riots and protests and things like that. One example is Lilith, the Jewish Women's Magazine, which is a huge step in change because a lot of the stories from Lilith came from Judaism. So the fact that Lilith is shown as a title really can attribute to the change. The writers of Lilith said that Lilith is a powerful female. She radiates strength, assertiveness, and she refuses to cooperate in her own victimization. By acknowledging Lilith's revolt and even in telling of her vengeful activities, mythmakers also acknowledge Lilith's power. So this magazine is really showing that women, regardless of what's going on, acknowledge Lilith's power and everything going on. So it's really, really important that we kind of make note of that. Another example of it is the book Witch Lilith. It was written by Lily Revlin, and she wrote about Lilith being a symbol of autonomy and sexual choice, being in control of one's own destiny, which people during that time didn't really have. The contributions in this book really kind of re-examined the way that we see the first woman as not really a negative connotation, but a positive one as well. We've also seen her in the reemergence of pop culture, where she's no longer being seen as someone that we need to fear and be afraid of, but for some of these shows as a joke, and some of them in a new light. So we see down here in the bottom left, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the White Witch, who is the protagonist or the antagonist in C.S. Lewis's book. Jandis is her name, and she ends up becoming known as a descendant, not of Eve, but of Adam's first wife, Lilith. We also see her shown as Madame Satan in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which is a more recent TV show. She is listed as Frasier's wife in the sitcom Frasier, which I believe was honestly more of a play on names and as a joke than her in a negative light. And then as well as the TV show Lucifer, one of the main characters, Mazikeen, is mentioned as a demon, but her mother was Lilith, which is really, really fascinating. So at the end of the day, we've kind of noticed that there's a huge shift between being God-fearing as a society and being more willing to have personal autonomy and a different viewpoint of society. So Lilith is part of that change, especially for women and for feminism. Thank you.